Good morning, classmates. Our topic for today is about evolution of Philippine Constitution. The 1973 Constitutional Authoritarianism. President Marcos issued Presidential Decree Number 73 setting the date of the plebiscite to ratify or reject the proposed constitution on November 30, 1973. This plebiscite was postponed later on since Marcos feared that the public might vote to reject the constitution. Instead of a plebiscite, citizen assemblies were held. From January 10 to 15, 1973, where the citizens coming together and voting by hand decided on whether to ratify the constitution, suspended the convening of the interim National Assembly, continue martial law, or place a moratorium on election for a period of at least several years. The 1973 Constitution was merely a way for the President to keep executive powers. This executive powers is a power with significant content. It is not the particular power of lawmaking or of determining disputes, but rather it is the general power to carry out all the other functions of the government. This is also to abolish the Senate, and by any means never acted as a parliamentary system. This parliamentary system is opposed to a presidential system like that used in the United States. So instead function as an authoritarian presidential system with all the real power concentrated in the hands of the president with the backing of the Constitution. Constitution timeline of events. In 1965, Ferdinand E. Marcos was elected president. So we all know who is Ferdinand Marcos. He was a Filipino politician and a kleptocrat who served as the 10th president of the Philippines. In 1967, Philippine Congress passed a resolution calling for a constitutional convention to change the 1935 Constitution. In 1969, Ferdinand E. Marcos won the re-election. In November 20, 1970, election of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention were held. In June 1, 1971, convention began formally with former President Carlos P. Garcia being elected as convention president. Unfortunately, he died and was succeeded by another former president, Diosdado Macapagal. Before the convention finished its work, martial law was declared. Marcos cited a growing communist insurgency as reason for the martial law, which was provided for in the 1935 Constitution. Some delegates of the ongoing Constitutional Convention were placed behind bars, and others went into hiding or were voluntarily exiled. With Marcos as dictator, the direction of the convention turned, with accounts that the president himself dictated some provisions of the Constitution, manipulating the document to be able to hold on to the power for as long as he could. So in November 29, 1972, the convention approved its proposed constitution. The constitution was supposed to introduce a parliamentary-style government, where legislative power was vested in a unicameral National Assembly, with members being elected to a 6-year term. The president was to be elected as the symbolic and ceremonial head of state chosen from the members of the National Assembly. The president would serve a 6-year term and could be re-elected to an unlimited number of terms. Executive power was relegated to the Prime Minister, who was also the head of the government and commander-in-chief of the armed forces, who was also to be elected from the National Assembly. And in January 10 to 15, 1973, citizen assemblies were held where the citizens coming together and voting by hand decided on whether to ratify the Constitution, suspended the convening of the interim National Assembly, continue martial law, or place a moratorium on elections for a period of at least several years. And in January 17, 1973, the President issued a proclamation announcing that the proposed constitution had been ratified by an overwhelming vote of the members of the highly irregular citizen assemblies. So in November 30, 1973, President Marcos issued Presidential Decree Number 73 setting the date of the plebiscite to ratify or reject the proposed constitution. In 1976, citizen assemblies decided to allow the continuation of martial law as well as approve the amendments. An interim batasang pambansa to substitute for the interim National Assembly, the President also to become the Prime Minister, and continue to exercise legislative power until martial law was lifted and authorized the President to legislate on his own on an emergency basis. In 1980, the retirement age of members of the judiciary was extended to 70 years. The situation in the 1980s had been very turbulent as Marcos amassed power. In 1981, the parliamentary system was formally modified to a French-style, semi-presidential system where executive power was restored to the president, who was once again to be directly elected. An executive committee was to be created, composed to the prime minister and 14 others that served as the president's cabinet, and some electoral reforms were instituted. But the tide turned swiftly when in August 1983, Benigno Aquino Jr., opposition leader and regarded as the most credible alternative to President Marcos, was assassinated while under military escort immediately after his return from exile in the United States. There was widespread suspicion that the order to assassinate Aquino came from the top level of the government and the military. This event caused the coming together of the nonviolent opposition against the Marcos authoritarian regime. Marcos was then forced to hold snap election a year early, and said elections were marred by widespread fraud. Marcos declared himself winner despite international condemnation and nationwide protests. A small group of military rebels attempted to stage a coup but failed. However, this triggered what came to be known as the EDSA People Power Revolution of 1986, as people from all walks of life spilled onto the streets. Under pressure from the United States of America, who used to support Marcos and his martial law, the Marcos family fled into exile. In 1984, the executive committee was abolished and the position of the vice president was restored. And in February 25, 1986, Corazon Aquino was installed as president. Benigno Aquino Jr.'s widow.
So, the 1987 Constitution after martial law. The President Corazon Aquino's government had three options regarding to the Constitution. The first one is to revert to the 1935 Constitution, then retain the 1973 Constitution and be granted the power to make reforms, and the last one is start new and break the vestiges of a disgraced dictatorship. They decided to make a new constitution that should be truly reflective of the aspirations and ideals of the Filipino people. The transitional constitution was proclaimed, and it also called Freedom Constitution. It maintained many provisions of the old one, including in rewritten form of the presidential right to rule by decree. In 1986, a constitutional convention was created and composed of 48 members appointed by the President Aquino from varied backgrounds and representations. The convention drew up a permanent constitution, largely restoring the setup abolished by Marcos in 1972, but with new ways to keep the president in check. The Constitution begins with a preamble and 18 self-contained articles. It established the Philippines as a democratic republican state where sovereignty resides in the people and all government authority emanates from them. It allocates governmental powers among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. In February 2, 1987, the Constitution was officially adopted. The executive branch is headed by the President and his cabinets whom he appoints. The President is the head of the state and the chief executive, but his power is limited by significant checks from the two other co-equal branches of government, especially during times of emergency. This is put in place to safeguard the country from the experience of martial law despotism during the presidency of Marcos. In cases of national emergency, the President may still declare martial law but no longer than a period of 60 days. The Congress, through a majority vote, can revoke this decision or extend it for a period that they determine. And also, the Supreme Court may also review the declaration of martial law and decide if there were sufficient justifying facts for the act. The President and the Vice President are elected at large by a direct vote, serving a single 6-year term. The legislative power resides in a Congress divided into two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The 24 senators are elected at large by popular vote and can serve no more than 2 consecutive 6-year terms. The House is composed of district representatives representing a particular geographic area and makes up around 80% of the total number of representatives. There are 234 legislative districts in the Philippines that elect their representatives to serve 3-year terms. The 1987 Constitution created a party list system to provide spaces for the participation of underrepresented community sectors or groups. Party list representatives may fill up not more than 20% of the seats in the House. Aside from the exclusive power of legislation, Congress may also declare war through a 2/3 vote in both upper and lower houses. The power of legislation, however, is also subject to an executive check, as the President retains the power to veto or stop a bill from becoming a law. Congress may only override this power with a 2/3 vote in both houses. The Philippine court system is vested with power of the judiciary and is composed of a Supreme Court and lower courts as created by law. The Supreme Court is a 15-member court appointed by the President without the need to be confirmed by Congress. The appointment the President makes, however, is limited to a list of nominees provided by a constitutionally specified judicial and bar council. The Supreme Court justice may hear on appeal any cases dealing with constitutionality of any law, treaty, or decree of the government, cases where questions of jurisdiction or judicial error are concerned, or cases where the penalty is sufficiently grave. It may also exercise original jurisdiction over cases involving government or international officials. The Supreme Court is also in charge of overseeing the functioning and administration of the lower courts and their personnel. The Constitution also established 3 independent constitutional commissions, namely the Civil Service Commission, which is a central agency in charge of government personnel, and the Commission on Elections, mandated to enforce and administer all election laws and regulations, and the Commission on Audit, which examines all funds, transaction, and property accounts of the government and its agencies. To further promote the ethical and lawful conduct of the government, the Office of the Ombudsman was created to investigate complaints that pertain to public corruption, unlawful behavior of the public officials, and other public misconduct. The Ombudsman can charge public officials before the Sandigan Bayan, which is the special court created for this purpose. Changing the Constitution is a perennial issue that crops up, and terms such as cha-cha, con-as, and con-con are regularly thrown around. Article 17 of the 1987 Constitution provides the 3 ways by which the Constitution can be changed. These are the 3 methods. The first one is the Congress. House of Representatives and the Senate may convene as a Constituent Assembly or CONAS to propose amendments to the Constitution. It is not clear, however, if Congress is to vote as a single body or separately. How the Congress convenes as a CONAS is not also provided for in the Constitution. Another method is through a Constitutional Convention or CONCON, where Congress, upon a vote of two-thirds of all its members, calls for a Constitutional Convention. They may also submit to a electorate the question of calling a convention through a majority vote of all its members. In a CONCON, delegates will propose amendments or revisions to the Constitution, not Congress. The 1987 Constitution does not provide for a method by which delegates to the CONCON are chosen. The third method is called People's Initiative, or PI. In this method, amendments to the Constitution may be proposed by the people upon a petition of at least 12% of the total number of registered voters. All legislative districts must be represented by at least 12% of the registered voters therein. No amendment is allowed more than once every 5 years since a successful PI. The 1987 Constitution directs the Congress to enact a law to implement provisions of the PI which has not yet materialized. Amendments or revisions to the Constitution shall be valid only when ratified by a majority of the votes cast in a national referendum. Only the House of Representatives can initiate the impeachment of the President, members of the Supreme Court, and other constitutionally protected public officials such as the Ombudsman. The Senate will then try the impeachment case. This is another safeguard to promote moral and ethical conduct in the government.
After the presidency of the late President Cory Aquino, there are several attempts to amend the 1987 Constitution. There are three methods, as said a while ago, by which the Constitution can be amended. First, the Congress. Second, the Constitutional Convention. Third is the People's Initiative. These are the attempts to change the 1987 Constitution. During Fidel V. Ramos' presidency in 1995, Secretary of National Security Council Jose Almonte drafted a constitution, but it was exposed to media and it never prospered. In 1997, a group called PIRMA hoped to gather signatures from voters to change the constitution, but many were against, including then Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago. For the presidency of Joseph Estrada, he formed a study commission to investigate issues surrounding charter change or CHACHA, focusing on the economic and judiciary provisions of the Constitution. This effort was also blocked by different entities. During Gloria Macapagal Arroyo presidency, the House Speaker, Jose de Venecia, endorsed constitutional change through Constitutional Assembly. The initiative was not successful since the term of President Arroyo was mired in controversy and scandal. In Benigno Aquino III presidency, Speaker of the House Feliciano Belmonte Jr., who attempted to introduce amendments to the Constitution that concerned economic provision that aimed toward liberalization, but the effort did not see the light of the day. For the current presidency of Rodrigo Roa Duterte, he is also known as an advocate of federalism. President Duterte signed an executive order creating a consultative committee to review the 1987 Constitution. So what is federalism? Federalism is a system of government in which the territory is controlled by two levels of government, both national government and the smaller political divisions. It is supported by President Duterte, saying it will evenly distribute wealth in the Philippines. These are some advantages of federalism. Each region may custom-fit solutions to problems brought by their distinct geographic, cultural, social, and economic context. Second, Its regions also have more power over their finances. It also promotes specialization, and it could also solve a lot of decade-old problems of the country. It also addresses inequality in wealth distribution and lastly, lessen dependence to Metro Manila. These are the disadvantages behind federalism. It creates competitions among regions. It is also a challenge to achieving unity in the country, and it may also challenge regions' preparedness. Ambiguities may arise where national ends and regionals begins. Shifts of system of government also entails cost. With all those amendments, unitary form is still the Philippines' current system, where administrative powers and resources are concentrated in the national government.